Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was on this day in 1966 that Cream played its first ever gig live. Now, the significance of Cream has been discussed on this channel and on others many times, but one of the things I find most interesting about them is they were one of the first bands to hit success on the so-called rock charts who didn't approach their craft from the position of most rock and roll musicians. At that time, the standard path, particularly in the UK, for musicians who found success in rock, would be to start from an obsession with blues or with folk music, and then work your way into the style of what at that time was called beat music, and hence rock and roll chart stardom would follow. Where with Cream, they all approached it from very different angles. Let's start with Jack Bruce. Jack Bruce was a classically trained cellist who was on the verge of entering professional orchestras in Scotland when he decided to go professional with bass, another instrument that he was fully classically trained on, and play mainly jazz and other genres that sort of sat next to jazz. But make no mistake, Jack Bruce was someone who was very much from a background atypical of the beat musicians in the pop and rock world at that time in the UK. Ginger Baker, on drums, of course, was someone whose main influence was a drummer called Phil Seaman, who was well known for integrating African rhythms and African approaches to the drum set into the context of modern European jazz. Eric Clapton, far from someone with a large blues collection on record who didn't really know what to do with it, Clapton was actually a scholar and aficionado of the blues. He wasn't some Johnny come lately, he wasn't some Johnny come imitate me. He was someone who really understood the history, the roots, and the musical ins and outs of the blues. And so when these three musicians came together, you had people that were approaching what turned out to be stardom in rock and roll from musical pedigrees that really were different than anything you got at the time. And the result was a very different sounding band. They were very raw and improvisational in terms of how they performed, but in terms of their virtuosity, they were very polished, right off the shelf. They were a cut above because Jack Bruce was such a technically gifted bass player, one of the best electric bass players of all time, with a wonderful voice with amazing dynamic range to boot. Eric Clapton was someone who was able to build on his vast knowledge of the blues to create truly remarkable, memorable, and innovative guitar playing. And Ginger Baker's integration of African drumming styles onto a contemporary Western drum set was totally different than just about every other drummer across genres who would either be riding the ride cymbal or the hi-hat. He would keep the basic tempo on the tom-toms, again, reminiscent of much of the hand percussion from Africa. And when you put all of this together, you get a band that even lay people, even the musically illiterate, even the musically unaware, they became instantly familiar with the fact that these three guys that they were watching were absolute virtuosi. And that is what they remained. They were a band that was short-lived, but in their sort of, what was it, just about 3 years or so that they were around, they really left such a dramatically big mark on music in terms of what audiences began to expect from live performances and the kind of innovation in songwriting and playing that audiences came to expect on records. And they influenced so many bands, all of the sophisticated progressive bands, fusion bands, particularly from Europe, but also from America, all of the bands who took blues rock to that next level for that next generation, all of whom were influenced by Cream. And Ginger Baker, in particular, was always very adamant that Cream were not a rock band and shouldn't be considered one. They were different. They were jazz, they were blues. You could really say that they were jazz, blues, rock fusion in many ways, but they were not your typical three chords in the truth rock band. And none of the musicians in Cream ever really aspired to do that. Jack Bruce went on to one of the most diverse and interesting solo careers ever. Ginger Baker played with many interesting people, including his own big band that he formed, not in the traditional big band model, but a modern sort of fusion big band called Ginger Baker's Air Force. He later played with the Baker Govitz Army, played with other jazzers, and Eric Clapton, of course, had a long and continues to have a long and fruitful career playing a kind of sometimes an authentic blues-based music, sometimes singer-songwriter type of compositions, but played in an electric blues style. And so much diversity within that range of the songs that Clapton has written, from a sort of very fusiony tune like Layla to Cocaine, which was obviously a cover, but one that Clapton made his own. Tears in Heaven, later on, a ballad, a mournful ballad, and the list can go on. There was so much creativity in that band that they could have potentially lasted 40 years. But because the personalities, because the egos involved clashed so much, they were one of those stars that rose meteorically and then fell. But that's kind of a misnomer as well, because they remained in the consciousness of music lovers for decades. And I think they still are. And because of their virtuosic playing style, always will be. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.